right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This is such a remarkable day, and also quite an assembly of remarkable people to participate. And so I just want to say to my dear friends and family and colleagues, students, scholars, and revolutionaries, welcome to the formal launch of the Unionist Unified, a website on which I and my library collaborators, Nick and Sharesley, who are here, have been working for the better part of a year. And in order to set the context for those of you who don't know this full story about what happened in Canterbury, which would mean that you haven't talked to me in the last year. But anyway, if you don't know the whole story, here's how it goes. So Canterbury in 1832, I'm not going to try anything fancy right now. Canterbury in 1832, there is a select female academy, roughly like a high school or community college level education, that was established for women. Prudence Crandall was a white woman who was teaching in that school as the head teacher. She had a household helper, Mariah Davis, a Black woman from Boston, who proselytized Crandall by bringing issues of the revolutionary newspaper, The Liberator, into the school. This had the desired effect on Crandall. It enabled her to see not only the massive sin that was slavery — she had been raised a Quaker, so she already was anti-slavery — but also to understand the onus and the horror of racism. Therefore, Crandall was, when a young woman of the area, Sarah Harris, came and asked if she could become one of the students in the academy. Crandall admitted her, but there was a white backlash. That white backlash threatened the very livelihood of the school. And so Crandall came up with a plan to reopen her school for Black women only. In so doing, she decided to approach the white abolitionist journalist, who was also revolutionary, William Lloyd Garrison. And when she did that, Garrison not only agreed to Crandall's plan, but immediately put her in touch with other activists, including most of the Black clergymen in New York City who were political leaders. Crandall visited them and they supported her plan. And so at that moment, what had happened was that to get this school to happen, Black and white, male and female, were all working together. It was the dawn of 1833. What were they working on? They were working on mental expansion and social change. Problem was, not everyone in Canterbury was with that program. The white backlash became more violent and more intense. The ferociousness expanded as students began to arrive from distant states. Vigilante violence was joined with legal violence when the Connecticut State Assembly passed a law making it illegal to harbor out-of-state Blacks for purposes of education, Connecticut's so-called Black law. The local press provided a phalanx of support for this blatant white supremacism. That was until the Unionist. The Unionist was a newspaper that was requested by Samuel J. May, one of the white abolitionists in Crandall's circle. It was financed by the wealthy abolitionist Arthur Tappan from New York City, and edited by a rookie, Charles C. Burleigh, who would go on to become one of the finest editors in the abolitionist movement, as well as one of its finest rhetoricians. These white men voiced a counter narrative of anti-racism, inclusion, and social transformation. They didn't just amplify the righteousness of Crandall's cause, but they also made sure that the national outcry over the mistreatment of the school and I'm back. Thank you for allowing me to continue. Okay, so I'm going to continue, hopefully. They didn't just amplify the righteousness of Crandall's cause, but they also republished the national outcry over her treatment and the mistreatment of the students, and the latest philosophic ideas specifically about nonviolent resistance. The Unionist was an exercise in revolutionary journalism, and it was enlivened by the idea of freedom that the Burleigh brothers were seeing daily in the activities of the Black students in Canterbury. The Unionist also established itself as a paper of record by very carefully giving accurate transcriptions of the the 4 legal trials that happened during this kerfuffle. While it lasted maybe just about a year as a newspaper, and there are only 5 complete extant issues, this website will provide the Unionist the opportunity to receive a fair assessment and to take its rightful place as Connecticut's first radical, immediate abolitionist newspaper. Okay. So I'm going to, I guess I'm freezing and unfreezing, but I'm going to just try to be as deliberate as possible here. And if you could let me know in the chat, if you're losing me entirely, that would be helpful. I have been told that my internet connection is unstable. Anyway, please stay with me. So this website functions as a documentary archive. All 5 of the full issues are here, plus all known reprinted extracts from the Unionist, as well as editorial comments, pro and con, on the paper. All are available in transcription. As more are found, they will be added. Just as importantly, though, this website functions as a place for reflecting on the history of anti-racism. The short essays will help guide newcomers to the highlights. More links will be included, as well as full citations and bibliography for further reading. All right, so okay, I can be heard well, that's important. This is the first academic digital humanities project in which I have been directly involved. I could not have done it without the help of my department and my college. The Humanities Department in the College of Humanities and Arts, and the digital wing of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. Specifically, I wish to thank Shannon Miller, my dean, my department chair, Shannon Rose Riley, Kathy Harris, who is our campus's digital humanities advocate and practitioner extraordinaire, and Christina Munier, who I see is here, the library's associate dean for innovation and resource management. But the most vital person in this puzzle is my collaborator, now much more than that, my friend, Nick Sildowski. He recently relocated from the East Coast, and I was so impressed with the social justice angle of the projects he had already accomplished that I could not believe my good fortune in finding someone so capable of supplying my obvious deficits while complementing my strengths. I'm delighted to introduce him to you.
I think that's my cue. I don't want to jump on what Jennifer
and
was
I'm
saying.
going to hand it over to him, and I'm going to go on video, on stop video and mute, and try to fix my end of things. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to screen share a little and show some slides here. Great. Thank you all for being here. It's really been an honor and a privilege to work with Jennifer Reisenga on this project and to help her bring her research on the Unionist and the abolitionist movement to the public in a way that I think is really engaging, powerful, and distinctive. I don't want to take too much time away from the historical content, from the stories that the site tells and what I think we're really all here to engage with. But I do think it's worth taking a step back while we're all here to think about what the library's role in a project like this can be. What does a library, specifically the King Library at SJSU, but also more generically, any academic or research library, bring to a digital scholarship project like this one? And I think it's particularly interesting in this case because it's really not our collections. None of the material included in the site belongs to the King Library. And it's particularly resonant because the context of this project is a failure of collections, a failure of any library or archive to collect and preserve the Unionist. So in that light, and in kind of to give you a peek behind the scenes into how these projects come together, I'm going to suggest a few things that might help to picture what it means to work with the library on a project like this. First, the library offers a space or framework or setting for collaboration, and this is something we're working towards to kind of be that kind of space. Second, the library offers technical infrastructure, and specifically infrastructure that's designed and intended to support collaboration and collaborative projects. And third, the collaborative setting makes it possible to bring in experts in areas that are relevant to the project. So I'm just going to talk about these really briefly. And I think a big part of my role today is to give a sense of what these kinds of projects look like, at least in the production phase after a lot of the research is done. So I first met with Jennifer about this project on November 4th, 2022, so not very long ago. Starting in January, we met weekly to plan and build the Unionist Unified website. One of the first things we worked through was how to structure the process, how to move Jennifer's transcriptions of the Unionist from Word documents to HTML that we could use on the site without losing the important formatting and all of the work she had already done. How to structure the metadata for transcriptions and related images in a way that would be flexible and would enable creative use, and how to manage the large number of files that the project would produce. So this is the metadata spreadsheet for the website. Each row represents a transcribed article from the Unionist or an image in the collection. And there are currently almost 800 items on the website, which Jennifer has tirelessly described and annotated. So we undertook to build the site as a collaborative project. And in order to do that effectively, we needed tools that would fit our workflow and our collective skill sets. And I'm not going to go into the tools in great detail, but for people in the audience who are curious and looking for kind of how we did it more view on the project, the site is built using Wax, a static site generator for digital projects. And this is an important one, and it's an important one thinking about digital humanities projects that might be in less resourced or social justice focused organizations that don't have a lot of infrastructure. This is a infrastructure piece that's really intended to be minimal, intended to not require a lot of IT resources in order to use. So we worked with that on this project. We worked with open source tools, Timeline.js and StoryMap.js to create interactive elements for timelines and story maps. And I think thirdly, establishing a collaborative process from the start makes it easier to add members to the team and sets up a team that's able to kind of incorporate new members who bring particular expertise to bear on the project. And in this case, Shresley Rodriguez, the library's user experience librarian, joined the team this spring to provide extremely helpful advice on the design and usability of the site, which really made a huge impact on the end product. So Shresley, could you share just a little bit about your process in working on this project?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nick. When Nick first told me about the Unionist and the work that Jennifer and him had done so far, I was instantly touched by the newspaper's history and the work that Jennifer did in collecting and organizing the transcriptions and the metadata. And before this project, I didn't know what Wax was, so I was going in as a first-time user of the site and the platform. But after discussions with Nick and Jennifer, I researched the best practices of digital exhibits generally, and also ones created on Wax to learn more. Next, I tested the site as a first-time user and made UX recommendations based on these conversations with Jennifer and Nick, as well as usability and digital exhibit principles. Finally, I created mockups of the site on Figma, and which is a free UX prototyping tool, and used it to discuss what could be done. And Nick was then able to code these recommendations onto the WAC site.
Thank you, Shresley. And I'm going to point out some of those recommendations as we go through the site because I think they were great. I just want to close by showing a few screenshots from the site. And then I think we're going to maybe do a quick walkthrough of the homepage. But I want you to get a sense, of the visual feel. This really ended up being a very visually dynamic project, much more than I would have expected coming in, or you might expect from a project that's focused on a newspaper. So you can see kind of how Jennifer used the related images to kind of bring to life these transcriptions. And at this point, I'll just do a really quick walkthrough. I don't think we've put the link in the chat yet either. We've been this has been at the last minute. So I'm going to put the link in the chat at this point for everybody to see, because we've been working on this up to the 11th hour. But this is the homepage of the site. And just to show you a few of the things that are built into here, in addition to sort of the descriptive text, you can see right away links to the 5 issues. Each issue has featured items that Jennifer pulled out but in addition, all the items, including the advertisements, are transcribed and annotated. When you click into an item, you'll see the transcription, nice and easy to read. You can see descriptive metadata that's here, and this enables the search functions on the site. And you can see related images that Jennifer has pulled out. Each item actually has an image related to it that provides the context and takes what would have been, a very text-heavy project and makes it much more visual. From the issue, you can also easily get to the scanned issues, which are here. If you want to see each item in its original context. And as Jennifer mentioned, there are also essays. So highlighted on the homepage is the trial of Frederick Olney, which I would guess we may talk about at some point later in this session, but you can see Jennifer's writing and related images and items. And lastly, I just want to highlight 2 interactive elements that, really for the context too, Jennifer really took these and built them on her own, so these are a timeline of the Unionist and also a map. And these tools are really great. We use them in the classroom. We use them in all kinds of settings where the learning curve is just really quick on these. So these are great tools. And also, this really helps you give the setting of, picture all these related newspapers and where they were distributed around the Northeast. All right. And before I pass it back to Jennifer, I just want to acknowledge how much work she put into this project and how much work goes into these kinds of projects. This is a very labor-intensive project and process, and very sort of human touch process, which I think is, it's sort of a project where the tool marks show in a really positive way, in the sense of showing that this is not an automated site. This is something that has been a lot of intellectual labor has been put into. So thank you to Jennifer and Shresley for being so great to work with on this project, and to the library marketing team for your help in getting the word out and creating all these graphics for us for today. So I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer at this point. Let me unshare.
Yes, I am here.
Awesome.
I've been told I'm unstable. I've been called worse. So I will simply continue. Thank you very much for your gracious words. And and to Shresley too for her contribution. I think the great promise of digital humanities is this increased access. It's much better than what happens for most scholarly projects. So I think it's quite exciting. And let me just see if I have any ability to share with you now a couple of my favorite pages. And here is Let me get you to one here. People will not be surprised to hear that I included a few jokes, those of you who know me. Now, it was also the practice in 19th century newspapers to include humor at the end of columns when you had nothing else to say. So here's this one from the 19th century. Can a leopard change his spots? Yes, if he does not like one spot, he can go to another. And this struck me as being a dad joke in a 19th century way. And so I provided an illustration for that. Because yes, while we are trying to change society, we can also be bring some good humor to the situation. Likewise, there is, by contrast, this very beautiful paragraph from a Black male editorial writer who wrote a letter to the editor. And he was writing under the name of the grumpy old Roman Republican leader Cato, a name that was often given, most ironically and viciously, to people who were enslaved. And Cato was also beckoning back to a revolutionary era Black leader who had used the name Cato in addressing the shortfall of the American Revolution. And in this opening paragraph in 1833, you can see the philosophic workings of the Black mind. Philosophy, though eagle-eyed in nature's tendencies, has not succeeded in drawing a line of discrimination between the members of the human family, so marked as to prescribe from the commonwealth of humanity those who Cowper says are guilty of a skin not colored like his own. The references to William Cowper, the great late 18th century poet whose anti-slavery poems were on the lips of every abolitionist and who was read by Prudence Crandall when she was a student. Indeed, if my complexion does afford proof that I am not so nobly born, not endowed with the same unalienable privileges and rights as those of a different color, I declare that I am not ambitious of attaining their prerogatives by changing skins with any of them, and much less do I repine at the decrees of him who is made of one blood all the nations of the earth. That is a wonderful beginning that tells us something about the struggle in Canterbury going across lines of gender and race that really sees the totality of the struggle. I consider that to be one of the hidden gems of the Unionist. And as I said, that struggle to really unite all humanity was what Canterbury was about. And here to speak some more to that and to the role of the Unionist within the history of Canterbury's female boarding school is Joan DiMartino, the museum curator and site superintendent of the Prudence Crandall Museum, site of the Canterbury Female Boarding School, a national historic landmark in Canterbury, Connecticut, owned by the state of Connecticut and operated by the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office. Joni earned the master's degree in public history from Rutgers University and has been in the museum field for over 25 years now, working at many different sites, from large institutions such as the Kentucky Historical Society and Mystic Seaport Museum to small historic home museums. She has done a lot of work on the history of women's suffrage and serves on the board of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, the board of the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, where she is the Connecticut coordinator for the National Votes for Women Trail Roadside Marker Program. And she is on the Advisory Council for Connecticut History Day, a National History Day state affiliate. She is finishing the reopening of the museum last year after its most significant restoration since the 1970s. And she is leading the reinterpretation of the Prudence Crandall Museum to expand the story, complicate the narratives, and position the history of the site in a national context. Happy to hand it over to you, Joni.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I want to start by congratulating Dr. Jennifer Rasenga for bringing this monumental project to fruition, especially in such a dynamic and accessible format, and also to thank her for asking me to share a few words today to mark this important launch. The State of Connecticut's Historic Preservation Office and Prudence Crandall Museum are proud to sponsor the Unionist Unified project. Dr. Risenga's scholarship regarding the effect the Unionist newspaper had in Connecticut and on the events that took place here in Canterbury in the 1830s. And incidentally, I'm actually sitting in the museum today. You can see Crandall and the image of the school behind me. But along with her uncovering the further information on the Burley family's constant and necessary support of Prudence Crandall, Sarah Harris, and the continuation of the school through the tumultuous 17 months it remained open, will certainly provide both researchers and visitors with a deeper insight and understanding into early abolition and education equity in Connecticut during the early 19th century. And as we're gathering here today virtually on a May afternoon to celebrate this success, I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about another day in May. I want us to reflect on a May 7th, 1833 day, almost 190 years ago to the date. Because on that day, Prudence Crandall's letter appears in the Windham County Advertiser addressed to its editor, Mr. Holbrook. Now, this letter is an important document. It's one of the few primary sources we have from Crandall's perspective of her admitting Sarah Harris as a student and then later switching her student body to Black and Brown students when she was unable to fully integrate her school. The first line of her letter, almost 190 years ago to date, that I want to highlight, quote, "Whatever reluctance I may feel to appear before the public, circumstance requires that I should do so," unquote. Right up front, Crandall acknowledges that she is aware that just in writing this letter to the editor, she is stepping beyond the bounds of the social role she is supposed to be confined to as a woman in the early 19th century society. She is not supposed to have her voice heard, her words read. After all, to publish is to make public. And respectable women of the 1830s did not amplify themselves beyond the private realm of hearth and home, let alone stand up to a state and a nation against racism and education inequity. Circumstances, of course, did, quote, require that she do so, unquote. And Crandall makes full use of her letter to share her reasons and actions to the community. But we also know that Holbrook and his Windham County Advertiser actively worked against Crandall and the Canterbury School. Hence the need to amplify even louder in the quiet corner, as we're known, of Connecticut, the need and the support for this school, for the students, and the work that they continue to do even after the closing of the school. And Dr. Risenga's new scholarship demonstrates that the Unionist, a small local press developed for the sole purpose of projecting the voices of the women connected to this boarding school of higher learning in Canterbury, defied the odds and did so, appearing as reprinted articles throughout New England and in other regions. I'm going to put my museum hat back on. The American Association of the State and Local History recently published a major national report titled Reframing History. And if you want, when I'm finished speaking, I'll be happy to put the link into the chat. But it has uncovered not surprising information for us museum professionals that history museums repeatedly rate as having the highest amount of trust from the American public for sharing historical information. We're not entirely sure why, but we have noticed that it increased even more so after the pandemic, which is interesting. The report also expresses that the importance of history be used as a tool for social justice and talks about how museums can accomplish that by connecting visitors to the actual documents and objects, which encourages them to think critically and come to their own conclusions about our shared past to envision a more just shared future. So the Unionist Unified website will now allow me, as a curator of this National Historic Landmark, to really connect visitors to read these resources, to provide them with the opportunity to spend time in the actual building where the Crandall sisters taught, where the Burley siblings taught, where the Harris sisters and the Glasgow sisters and the Hammond sisters and the other students all learned as well. And being in this place and reading these rediscovered articles, which is so important. To be honest, right now, as I'm waiting for my exhibit to come back from the exhibit designer and the printers, I'm showing visitors old photocopies of the Unionist. But now I can have this wonderful QR code, which is going to link them right into the website, and they can spend as long as they want perusing that. We can have iPads and laptops and different ways of enabling them to negotiate on their own terms of the website and to find the articles that they themselves would like to explore. But the community of supporters that created the Unionist helped the students feel, in the words of one anonymous student, that the school was, quote, a place of communion with heaven, unquote, at a time when the Windham County Advertiser was publishing announcements on ways to break up the school. The community we want to create here at the museum reflects that which supported the school in 1833, where everyone involved used their skills and place of privilege in society to work toward a more just world. The museum's mission is essentially to inspire visitors to continue the mission begun by Prudence Crandall and Sarah Harris. The Prudence Crandall Museum, site of the Canterbury Female Boarding School, a National Historic Landmark, places the school in its historic context from abolition to civil rights, confronts the continued struggle for equitable schooling, and through dialogue and activity encourages its audience to dismantle education and justice. The need to continue the progress toward equitable access to education for all students today is still ongoing, and Dr. Rasenga's life's work, both as an educator herself and as a scholar of this history, will help the museum continue to inspire visitors to fulfill Crandall's and Harris's mission. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joni. I really appreciate that. And I liked the picture very much of people coming to the museum and then going to the website. It makes me very happy. And hopefully they will be challenged and can see what I'm trying to point out about that understanding how to be anti-racist as a white person involves also understanding where mistakes were made and where there were shortcomings. And I have a section in the essay about that, in the essays about that. So I'm going to keep passing the mic around here because I'm also very proud to have with us our next guest, Lou Turner. He is a revolutionary activist and journalist himself. He is clinical professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois at the main campus of Urbana-Champaign. And he is the former academic advisor for the Department of African American Studies there. Lou Turner was research and public policy director for the Chicago Southside Community Organization Developing Communities Project from 2000 to 2014. That was the same organization that someone named Barack Obama was involved with. He is a board member of the African American Leadership and Policy Institute. Professor Turner is the principal investigator for Hal Barron Digital Archival Research and Publication Project at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. A colleague of the late Hegelian Marxist philosopher Raya Dunayevskaya, he has written extensively on Fanonian, Marxian, and Hegelian dialectics. He was also a comrade of the late worker editor Charles Denby. Turner became the managing editor of the Marxist Humanist newspaper News and Letters. With Dr. Helen Neville, Turner co-edited Frantz Fanon's Psychotherapeutic Approaches to Clinical Work, Practicing Internationally with Marginalized Communities. That just came out in 2020. Lou Turner is the co-author of Frantz Fanon, Soweto, and American Black Thought, which circulated in the anti-apartheid underground of the Black consciousness movement in South Africa. In 2021, Lou developed an asynchronous online class, Black Arts Today, for the College of Fine and Applied Arts, and authored a Black Arts e-text as one of the 3 digital platforms used in the course. He is currently a member of a critical cybernetics cluster, C3, which explores communication and control science from humanistic and social science perspectives. Turner is currently in the process of finishing a manuscript on early Hegelian cybernetics philosopher Gotthard Gunther, a central figure in cybernetic thought, employed by Heinz von Forster at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign's Biological Computer Laboratory. In addition to that extensive background, Many years ago, when I first discussed the Canterbury incidents with Lou Turner, he gave me the phrase that has guided me in this project. He said that the Canterbury moment was a luminous moment in American history. And I feel quite certain that you will be illuminated by what he has to say too. Thank you and welcome, Lou.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So it's an honor to be here. I will try to keep my typically extensive comments short, so there'll be more time for conversation. I guess the thing that I was thinking about in going over, reading or thumbing through, quote unquote, your digital humanities website, I'm involved in a couple of them myself here at the University of Illinois, was thinking about the role of journalism and education as abolitionist projects, which were fundamentally revolutionary in terms of literacy, and both in terms of private or education, but also public education of journalism. And I thought of democracy, which of course is under such assault today, as not just a discipline, but a revolutionary discipline. And I think it's beginning to dawn more and more on Americans who have not thought of it in those terms, as American democracy comes more and more under assault. And I thought about the period of the Unionist and the Crandall Academy for Black girls and women, and I thought about the revolutionary dimension of Black women as, to me, a very important aspect of this project. I also thought of the period in which the newspaper and the school was created, and thought of what made both the newspaper and the school so revolutionary. And of course, in a certain sense, we often learn what is revolutionary by those who oppose change, who oppose social justice and equality. They're very often better at telling us what is revolutionary than we ourselves, who seem to be at times rather timid about these things. But think about the period of the 5 years from 1829 to 1834, which is, a pretty tight period when you think about it in terms of 19th century terms, but so much changed so quickly, which in itself, kind of quick or swift transformation, is another kind of definition of what is revolutionary. In 1829, the David Walker's Appeal was written. David Walker's Appeal was written in Boston. 1829 was also when the Denmark-Vesey insurrection happened in Charleston, South Carolina. Now think, and this is another aspect again of us learning more from those who are opposed to social equality. Denmark-Vesey helped build a church. In fact, it was considered the Denmark-Vesey Church in Charleston, South Carolina. The Denmark-Vesey insurrection was discovered and was suppressed, but was the most extensive slave insurrection in American history. The church in Charleston that Denmark-Vesey was responsible for helping to build, he actually was an emancipated slave and a carpenter, is the church that several years ago was the scene of a white supremacist murder of the congregants in the church. It's called Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, the white supremacist young man who lived on the outskirts of Charleston drove more than 30 miles from where he lived in the suburbs to this particular church. And in that period, he must have passed maybe a dozen Black churches. So why didn't he go to one of those? He went to Mother Emanuel Church, Denmark-Vesey's church. So he understood more about the history of Black liberation than I think those of us who often talk about social equality and social justice. Of course, that is under attack today in places like Florida as well. And so that the project of Prudence Crandall, strangely enough, we see the more things change, the more they remain the same. Prudence Crandall's church elicited this white backlash in her town for the crime of teaching young Black women. Again, the power of Black literacy is incredibly important. The famous Black abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, whose narrative is one of the great documents of letters in American history and literature, had this to say about the significance of learning to read, just the act of learning to read as a revolutionary act. When he talked about in his narrative the power of learning to read, he said and wrote, I can remember this verbatim, he said, learning to read, he said, suddenly freedom appeared to disappear no more forever. And so the project that Prudence Crandall created of helping young Black women to read, to get an education, was a freedom project, was a freedom activity, and was revolutionary. And so from 1829 to 1831, which was the year of Nat Turner's insurrection in Southampton, Virginia, is also the year in which the first woman spoke in public. And it was a Black woman by the name of Maria Stewart. And the repression against that at the time, of course, was heavy as well. And 1831, of course, was when William Lloyd Garrison started the Liberator. And at the time, the young abolitionist movement was challenged to decide how it was going to respond to Nat Turner's insurrection. Many in the abolitionist movement were nonviolent. Here was an act of insurrection by slaves. And Garrison and others, it divided, in a certain sense, the abolitionist movement over what was the real essence of the project that they had embarked on of abolitionism. Garrison, I was more of a Garrisonian than a Douglasan, because Garrison thought that the Constitution was a slave document and Douglas did not. They actually debated the nature of the Constitution. As a young man, I was more Garrisonian, I think. But the idea of that there are many tendencies, revolutionary tendencies and reformist tendencies, quite frankly, in a movement like the abolitionist movement, was always remained an internal test of abolitionism. And so Crandall and the Burley brothers, very, very important in terms of publicizing the importance of newspapers and journalism as also a means of creating an educated public about what the nature and the moral reasoning of what democracy meant in society. And so I think that this is a tremendous project, but it's a project to me about, as the famous Black comedian Flip Wilson used to say, the church of what's happening now. It speaks to what is happening now. It's not simply an historical project. It is certainly that, but because Americans have a way of repeating their history over and over again, and we keep having these ongoing reckonings with that history. I see this project as very much speaking to much of what is happening today as more and more people become involved in the struggle for social justice, and particularly Black social justice in this country. That's certainly been the case since the murder of George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think that this project comes right on time, and I certainly intend to send my students to check it out. Certainly, when I was over in African American Studies department, would be the kind of project I would have students actually engaged in developing projects around. So I want to thank Jennifer and her crew, and I really look forward to having many more days of going through and finding my own little pathways through this project. I have a few things that kind of caught my attention that I wondered about, beginning with the name, the Unionist. So I'll put that question right out there right away, because it's a very interesting term, and one that I'm very curious about.
Yeah, no, the Unionist is very interesting, and thank you very much for that. That's very illuminating, and just, yes, there is a lot that happens in that time period of 1829 to 34. And I've spent a long time looking at it for that very reason. But I just want to say that the choice of the Unionist was much mocked by the opponents of the Unionist, and you can see that in the transcriptions. They called it the disunionist, because this was one of the ways that the abolitionists were silenced, was by saying you're trying to break up our new country, the United States. And so it was widely pilloried. I have to thank the Burleys for choosing the title of the Unionist, because that means that I can search for the title Unionist within the dates of before 1860, making it much easier to find, because I would have been overwhelmed with data if I hadn't been able to do that. I'm not sure, though, the genesis of why they chose that name, I'm unsure of, but what they wanted, of course, was an entire country that would be free of slavery and free of racism. We're still working on the latter project. And when Lou mentions how up to date this is, I just want to say that the article that Nick drew attention to, the one about Frederick Olney, there were 4 legal cases involving the Crandall School. 3 of them involved the Black Law that I referenced earlier and Crandall's teaching of Black students. The 4th one involved a fire that happened at the school, and that fire was purposely set. And there happened to be a Black man visiting the school that day named Frederick Olney, who was a friend to many people at the school. He put the fire out as soon as the students had detected it. He determined it had started from the outside, and he was the hero of the day. But the white supremacists couldn't handle that. And so to deflect attention from themselves, they accused him of setting the fire. So this is a narrative that we know all too well in our own time, which is the framing of Black men for crimes they did not commit. And the trial that happened as a result, the Unionist was the only one to record it in detail. And the young lawyer who recorded it went on to become a major official in the United States, working in the Senate later. And so it's quite interesting that this is the most important thing that the Unionist has preserved. But I don't want to take away the very best part of the Unionist. Suffice to say that the second part of the trial transcript contains an incident in which the mother of one of the students traveled from New York to appear to help defend Frederick Olney. And she wasn't herself literate, but she brought one of her older daughters who was literate to be able to speak for her and with her. And it is one of the most powerful testimonies to the Black community I've ever read. And I had the singular honor of being able to share that with a descendant of that family, who is herself a major scholar. So anyway, I just want to say there are so many people I have to thank. Most of all, my family, my wife, Peggy, my sisters, Clara and Mary, who is here today, their husbands, families, and children. My mother, along with my late father, inspired in me a love of jigsaw puzzles, which has come in very handy in putting the Unionists back together. But they also provided me with an invaluable love of justice. My father was a jovial, wonderful man. I had never seen him angry until at the age of 6, I saw him chase away a neighbor with shouting words at someone who had suggested that undesirables ought to be kept out of the neighborhood, code language in 1964 for segregation in the North. And so I'm very grateful to my parents for everything they have brought me. I'm also grateful to San Jose State for its many years of support, and delighted that I could give back this way. I am retiring at the end of this semester, and that means next week. I have established a scholarship for students pursuing interdisciplinary work, and I'm happy to share that in the chat in a moment. And I also want to say at this time that I just got word from the University of Illinois Press that my full-length study of the Crandall School, Intersectional Pilgrims in Canterbury, Students and Teachers at Prudence Crandall's Female Academy, will be forthcoming sometime in 2024. Watch this space. Yes, I agree with those of you who are clapping. Watch this space, because in addition to announcing the book, Nick and I will be working, and I hope Sheresley too, on a companion project tracing the Burley family, because it was not just Charles and his brother William, the co-editors. It was 6 brothers and 1 sister, all of whom have documented anti-slavery and anti-racist records. That's a pretty remarkable family, and they have yet to have a single scholarly article dedicated to them. So we are going to assemble a page for them to correspond to this one. And hopefully that too will be forthcoming in 2024. So I'm going to see what the questions are and see what I can, oh, someone had to go to another meeting. I'm so sorry. All right. Oh, and Caitlin Pambid was there, and she's going to be presenting at a museum studies conference. Very good, Caitlin. I'm so proud of you. And I didn't realize she was with you, Eric. That's wonderful. And the upcoming title, I'll put it in the chat here. And I will also add, and then, yeah, to develop lesson plans for the books. Oh, I like that. And website for different class levels. I will work on that, because I will be retired. So maybe I can. So yes, it will be Intersectional Pilgrims in Canterbury. And yes, I can stoop to even having a silly referential pun in my title. Students and Teachers at Prudence Crandall's Academy. So yeah, and by the way, I'm not the first to make a pun about Canterbury and Pilgrims. This was done by Wendell Garrison, the son of William Lloyd Garrison. So I am not alone in my my dad jokes. And a warm welcome from Tom Schutch, who is the wonderful historian doing work in New London on the connection to the Harris sisters, 3 of whom lived there after the time of the Crandall School, one of whom married Frederick Olney, Olive Smith Harris, who I am deeply suspicious was a student at the school. So thank you for being here, and thank you very much, Tracy, for your congratulations, and also to Lou. She sends congratulations. Yes, and Eric, that's a great question about the intersection of digital humanities and the physical archive. The 5 issues that were preserved are in 3 different archives, all 3 of them storied and important ones: the American Antiquarian Society, which is my idea of heaven, and then the New York Historical Society, and the Library of Congress, which is something like Uber heaven. I mean, it's, you know, it's a whole nother step above. The Library of Congress, though, had originally misfiled 2 of their issues. The Unionist was published in Brooklyn, Connecticut. The Library of Congress had filed these in their New York file because of Brooklyn being more associated with New York. And so they were only discovered by them in 2016, and then only by me in a desperate search for more issues. And so I was the first scholar to get to look at those issues, which included that touching story of the end of the only trial that I was mentioning. And so they have, the physical archives have all agreed to allow the full images of the newspapers on this website. I've been in constant contact with them about that. And I would add that in this case, it's really helpful. We know these are unique documents, and the more hands that are on them, the worse that is from an archival perspective. And so that is I would think, better for the archives to have these now in a digital format so that there will be less handling. And I don't know if there's a connection to Brooklyn, Illinois, but I would look for a Burley connection there, and I'll be on the lookout. So the other thing is, of course, that the town of Brooklyn, Connecticut was associated with Samuel J. May, who was a very famous and important abolitionist and who had been the Unitarian clergyman there before he moved on to Syracuse. And so that is another possibility that Brooklyn could have come up there. There was, of course, also a very active Black community in Brooklyn, New York. So it could have been from that as well. Or there could have been a brook there. I don't know. All right. Any other questions? Well, as I say to my students when I've given them good information, it is one thing for me to tell you this, but please do me a favor and tell somebody else. Spread the news and spread the website link. If you could put the link in the chat one more time, I'd appreciate that, Nick or Shiresley. And oh yeah, and Tom, thank you for that information that Brooklyn was also where the largest slaveholder in Connecticut lived. So yeah, and you know, I have to say, having spent a couple of weeks in Brooklyn, sometimes it feels a lot more like that than like the home of the Unionist and of the Benson and Burley families. Anyway, I do hope that you will spread the news. And again, thank you to everybody. Everything in digital humanities is collaborative. And I wouldn't be here right now without Nick and Shiresley. So thank you so much.